Hello everyone, I am Dr. Srimati Raman, one of the consultants in WMN group of doctors. There are lots of myths and misconceptions surrounding cervical cancer. Today, we are going to be debunking a few important myths through this Doc Debunks video. Bad and ugly to this cervical cancer. So what is good about it? It is one of the preventable forms of cancer. What is the bad around it? It is the second most common cancer in Indian women, and it is the leading cause of deaths among Indian women. The ugly, the myths and the misconceptions surrounding cervical cancer has led to a decrease in uptake of HPV vaccines as well as cervical screening, and this contributes to the deaths among women because of cervical cancer. Let's learn a few facts about cervical cancer. Cervical cancer is a cancer of the neck of the womb, and it is caused by a virus called human papillomavirus. We need to understand about human papillomavirus so as to understand how we can prevent cervical cancer. It is one of the most common sexually transmitted infection, and nearly 50 to 80% of men and women may have the virus at some point during their life. But what we also have to understand is that nearly 80 to 90% of adults are able to actually shed the virus or develop immunity so that they are able to overcome the infection. But in about 10 to 20% of men and women, this infection leads to persistence, and that is when we have abnormality in the cells happening, which leads to cervical cancer development. HPV only affects women. It is definitely not true, because HPV virus is carried by both men and women, and in fact even in men it causes lots of diseases. So HPV is linked to cervical cancer and vaginal cancer in women. It can also cause penile cancer in men. It is also linked to development of genital warts as well as throat cancer. Let's go to the next myth. Only older women are at risk of cervical cancer. Cervical cancer may manifest in older women, but what we need to understand is that the reason for cervical cancer is HPV infection, and this is usually acquired during early years of sexual life. And in fact, it can take a median of up to even 20 to 25 years before they develop a cervical cancer. Hence the importance of cervical screening. Let's look at another myth. A child born to a cervical cancer survivor will inherit cancer. Definitely not. Cervical cancer is not hereditary. There are of course other forms of cancer in women which are hereditary. This includes cancers of the ovary, breast and the uterus, which we say is the endometrium. So those cancers could be hereditary, but cervical cancer is definitely not hereditary. Let's look at another common myth. You don't need regular screening if you're vaccinated against HPV. What we need to understand is that the vaccine covers only a few subtypes of the HPV virus. Also, the infection could have been acquired even before the vaccination series was complete. Hence, regular cervical screening in the form of maybe pap smears or HPV testing or some visual inspection is mandatory even if you have been vaccinated against HPV. Another common myth is, I don't need to worry about cervical cancer if I don't have symptoms. This is definitely not true, because many women with cervical cancer may not have symptoms. Of course, if you have symptoms like abnormal discharge from the vagina, or if you have any abnormal bleeding, you would need to contact a healthcare professional so that you can be evaluated for the same. But definitely, women who are asymptomatic also may have cervical cancer or precancerous changes, hence stressing the need for regular cervical screening. Let's look at another important myth. Cervical cancer is not preventable. This is the most important myth which we will have to debunk, because cervical cancer is one of the preventable forms of cancer. We have effective prevention strategies in the form of HPV vaccine and of course cervical screening, which helps us pick up abnormality early in the process so that we can prevent cervical cancer. So it is very, very important for us to remember cervical cancer is definitely preventable. As we know, there are lots of myths which are surrounding cervical cancer, but let's look at last one. Men have no role in cervical cancer therefore they don't need HPV vaccine. Men play a very important role in the transmission of HPV virus because it's one of the most common sexually transmitted infection. Hence, we in fact prefer both males and females have the HPV vaccine because we would then be able to have immunity for the whole population from HPV virus. So hence, we would recommend both boys as well as girls have the HPV vaccine. Let's learn a few facts on HPV vaccines. It has now become easily accessible, and in fact the government of India is planning to launch it in its immunization program. So what are the different types of HPV vaccine which are available? We have different vaccines covering the different subtypes of HPV virus. So we have a nanovalent vaccine which covers 9 types. We have a quadrivalent vaccine which covers 4, and we also have a bivalent which covers 2 subtypes. Now the question is, who can have it and when can they have it? So all boys and girls around the age of 11 to 12, it is usually preferable to give the HPV vaccine. But if you look at the schedule, 9 to 14, we need usually 2 doses, which is usually given at 0 months and 6 months. If you have beyond 15 and beyond, the ideal recommendation is that they have 3 doses, which is given 0, roughly 1 to 2 months after the first dose, and then 6 months after the first dose. But of course now there are lots of evidences coming up through the WHO that even a single dose is going to be very effective. So if you are able to do the full dose regime, which is the 2 dose or the 3 dose, that's good, but even a single dose is going to be very effective. And as we discussed, both boys and the girls are eligible. What we also have is the catch-up vaccination. 15 to 26 can have it, and also it can be given as much as 45 years of age. But of course, you would have to discuss with your healthcare professional about the same. Cervical screening is very important even if you have been vaccinated against HPV. This may start at the age of 21 or 25 depending upon the method of cervical screening you are going to have. It can be 3, it can be pap smear, which is usually recommended once in 3 years. It could be HPV testing, which is done usually once in 5 years, or it could be as a visual inspection, which we do with various techniques called as visual inspection with acetic acid, etc. So for more information, please discuss it with your healthcare professional, and please ensure you have one or the other methods of cervical screening on a regular basis. I hope we have cleared the air on cervical cancer today. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel DocsDebunk.